The Key to Power. In one of his fascinating stories of the Indian Mutiny, Louis Tracy tells of a native officer named Muhammad Khan who was invulnerable in battle. He is a lion among brave men, the natives would say, but steel or lead cannot touch him. He had the jadoo, a fetish or amulet. And in 40 years' service, that jadoo never failed him. In a dozen pitched battles and scores of hill fights, he never received a wound, though comrades fell all about him. Yet nothing would persuade him to give the secret of his invulnerability. It seems that at the outbreak of the mutiny, Muhammad Khan was a lad of 19 in one of the native cavalry regiments of which his father was Risaldar Major. Though most of the regiment joined the mutineers, he and his father swore to be true to their salt, and with a couple of troops of horse they were stationed in a mud fort near Delhi to serve as a refuge for the whites who escaped the massacre, and to help in every way they could. In a little town some miles away, the natives murdered the English resident, but because of the hate of one of their number, they decided on a special refinement of cruelty in the killing of his wife and sister and the 3 little children. They told them first they were not making war on women, and that they would escort them through the jungle to within a couple of miles of the fort, and leave them to make their way to their friends in safety. But they instructed the soldiers who were to form their escort that, after letting the women get 100-yard start across the plain towards the fort, just when safety was in sight and their fears gone, they were to shoot them down. The soldiers carried through the program as directed. They conducted the women and children to the edge of the jungle. They bade them goodbye and saw them start joyfully towards the fort. Then they opened fire. Missing the first volley, they ran forward to do their murderous work with knives and clubbed muskets, when from the woods behind them came in rapid succession 2 shots, and the rearmost of the soldiers fell dead. Before the others could recover from their surprise, a native cavalryman was upon them, cutting and thrusting with his saber, and before 5 minutes had passed, every man of that treacherous escort was dead. That young cavalryman was Muhammad Khan. He had been out on patrol the previous evening and lost his way. As he did not know the country well, he had tied his horse to a tree and slept until morning. Just as he was saddling at dawn to ride back to the fort, he heard the soldiers approaching, and cautiously waited to see who they were and what they were going to do. When they opened fire, he first emptied his carbine and pistol, then mounted and charged them with his saber. When the fight was over, the women and children ran to him and fell on their knees, and thanked him. When he protested, they made him kneel with them, and they prayed to God for him, weeping as they prayed, and making each child repeat the words after them. They prayed to the King of Kings to safeguard him from all risks, to make him happy and prosperous, and to grant him a peaceful and honorable old age. Never did that scene efface itself from Muhammad Khan's memory: the tearful, hysterical women, the awestruck children, the bodies lying about where they had fallen. And never did the sense of protection that seemed to enfold him then leave him. And as they prayed, so was it with him. Well might he have said with the psalmist of old, "He that dwelleth in the secret place of the Most High shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty. He shall cover thee with his feathers, and under his wings shalt thou trust, his truth shall be thy shield and buckler. Thou shalt not be afraid for the terror by night, nor for the arrow that flieth by day, nor for the pestilence that walketh in darkness, nor for the destruction that wasteth at noonday. 1,000 shall fall at thy side, and 10,000 at thy right hand, but it shall not come nigh thee. There shall no evil befall thee, neither shall any plague come nigh thy dwelling. For he shall give his angels charge over thee, to keep thee in all thy ways." Yet he never told the story. No one in the regiment, even among his brothers, knew it. Why? Because to give the secret of his jadoo would have dispelled its power. By keeping it stored safely in his own mind, it grew in strength until nothing could do him harm. You have seen a kettle of water boiling away, the steam pouring out of the spout, scarce enough left to rattle the lid. Yet if you stop up the spout for a few minutes, what happens? The steam quickly attains such pressure that it blows the lid off entirely. Professor Sigmund Freud has shown how ideas work in much the same way, attaining a pressure that blows the top of things when they have no outlet for expression. He shows that fears, long held, are responsible for many nervous diseases, that sex repressions cause many others, and by the mere searching out in the patient's mind the reason for his fear or repression, and getting him to talk about it, he has released the pressure and saved many a person from a nervous breakdown or even insanity. That is the basis of all psychoanalysis: to locate the hidden reasons for the patient's fears or repressions, reasons that sometimes date so far back that the patient himself has forgotten them, and release the pressure by getting him to talk about them. That is why, so often, the telling of one's troubles to a doctor relieves them. Talk is a safety valve. The water boils in the kettle of our minds, and the steam escapes through the spout of our mouths. When the boiling water contains noxious vapors like fears and repressions and thoughts of disease, the mouth is truly a safety valve. We let them out, and when presently they have all boiled off, we can forget them. Of course, that may be hard on those we tell them to, for we are putting similar noxious vapors into the minds of others. So when you want to get rid of such, it is well to do it to some practitioner of the mental sciences, who can dispel them from himself as well as from you. The trouble with most people is that they do not stop when they have released all their noxious vapors. They let the steam escape in the same way through the spout of their mouths. They have a constructive idea. And every idea, good or bad, tends to express itself in physical activity. But before this one can gather sufficient force to amount to anything, they dissipate all its steam by telling it to the first one who will listen to it. You have an idea for a new and better way of doing your work, let us say. Instead of letting it simmer for a while, gathering force and power and seeking out channels that will make its accomplishment easy, you go off at half-cock, as it were. You tell your plan to some of your fellow workers, and they pick holes in it and discourage you. Or you go to the boss with it before it is complete and he can't see it. And when you are all through, you feel like a pricked balloon. Take a lesson from the experience of Samson. As we have often said before, we believe the Bible to be the greatest work of practical psychology ever written. Whether or not Samson actually slew 1,000 Philistines with the jawbone of an ass and pulled a lion apart with his bare hands, from a psychological point of view the account is sound. Just listen. And the angel of the Lord appeared unto the woman and said unto her, Thou shalt conceive, and bear a son, and no razor shall come on his head, for the child shall be a Nazarite unto God from the womb, and he shall begin to deliver Israel out of the hand of the Philistines. Then went Samson down to Timnath, and behold, a young lion roared against him. And the Spirit of the Lord came mightily upon him, and he rent him as he would have rented a kid, and he had nothing in his hand, but he told not his father or his mother what he had done. And it came to pass afterward, that he loved a woman in the valley of Sorek, whose name was Delilah. And the lords of the Philistines came up unto her, and said unto her, Entice him, and see wherein his great strength lieth, and by what means we may prevail against him, that we may bind him to afflict him, and we will give thee every one of us 1,100 pieces of silver. And Delilah said to Samson, Tell me, I pray thee, wherein thy great strength lieth, and wherewith thou mightest be bound to afflict thee. And Samson said unto her, If they bind me with 7 green withs that were never dried, then shall I be weak and be as another man. Then the lords of the Philistines brought up to her 7 green withs which had not been dried, and she bound him with them. Now there were men lying in wait, abiding with her in the chamber. And she said unto him, The Philistines be upon thee, Samson. And he breaks the withs, as a thread of tow is broken when it toucheth the fire. So his strength was not known. And Delilah said unto Samson, Behold, thou hast mocked me, and told me lies. Now tell me, I pray thee, wherewith thou mightest be bound. And he said unto her, If they bind me fast with new ropes that were never occupied, then shall I be weak and be as another man. Delilah, therefore, took new ropes, and bound him therewith, and said unto him, The Philistines be upon thee, Samson. And there were liars in wait abiding in the chamber. And he breaks them from off his arms like a thread. And Delilah said unto Samson, Hitherto thou hast mocked me, and told me lies, tell me wherewith thou mightest be bound. And he said unto her, If thou weavest the 7 locks of my head with the web. And she fastened it with the pin, and said unto him, The Philistines be upon thee, Samson. And he awakened out of his sleep and went away with the pin of the beam, and with the web. And she said unto him, How canst thou say, I love thee, when thine heart is not with me? Thou hast mocked me these 3 times, and hast not told me wherein thy great strength lieth. And it came to pass when she pressed him daily with her words and urged him so that his soul was vexed unto death, that he told her all his heart, and said unto her, There hath not come a razor upon mine head, for I have been a Nazarite unto God from my mother's womb. If I be shaven, then my strength will go from me, and I shall become weak, and be like any other man. It was not the loss of his hair that made Samson weak. It was the loss of his secret. That secret had been with him from birth. None had spoken of it to him but his mother and father, and he had never before mentioned it to a soul. It filled him like steam in a boiler. It gave him unlimited power to work havoc among his enemies. But when he opened the spout and loosed off all the pressure, he was no better or stronger than any other man, and the Philistines took him and put out his eyes and threw him into prison. In the solitude of that prison, the strength came back to him. With no one to talk to, no way to release the pressure, the steam again accumulated, and when the Philistines would have made sport of him, he brought down their temple upon their heads. And in solitary thought, strength will come to you, too. Don't tell your plans, your ideas. Let them simmer, grow perfect, and accumulate strength until they force you to achieve your goal. Let them work up the pressure that blows off the lid and makes openings for you. Let them grow until they are like a mighty river which first sweeps over the dam, then carries the dam and all before it. Looking backward, life is filled with opportunities, and there is always room at the top in some line of endeavor for you, no matter how crowded the bottom may be. The God in you has a special genius for something, and he is merely waiting to be directed into the right channels of service. Your job is to discover and develop that particular bent. But do not meantime complain about your present work or position. Whatever it is, depend upon it, it is the right place for you until you have learned its lesson. Success is not some sudden achievement. Success is like any other great structure, it must be built up brick by brick, and all manner of skills and materials enter into its making. What you are doing now is just as necessary to it as the higher paid work you will probably be doing a year from now. Old wealth is always dying rapidly. In a recent letter, one of the big economic forecasting services stated that 83% of those who have money when they are 35 years old lose it by the time they are 60. Even the great fortune of the first Baron Rothschild, a wizard of finance, had shrunk by 85% within the 10 years after his death. Old wealth is continually dying, but God is always creating all things new, so use the prayer suggested by Brown Landon in a recent issue of Nautilus. O God, who maketh all things new, I will get in line with thee. I am this hour healed of my blindness of forever looking at all old things. I am healed of my dumbness of holding on to the old and letting new things pass by me. As all things are being made new, so I am made new. I arise, I come up out of my cellars of want. I walk forth into the fields of new wealth and live in the midst of their abundance. The Chinese have a saying that the path of duty is near, yet men seek it afar off. Go home and seek it, and you will not lack teachers. Every job is an open door to a better one, but you can open that door only by doing your job better than anyone else has ever done it before, doing it as to the Lord, in a spirit of loving service. There is a task for today that can be done now better than at any other time. Each minute, each day, has its share in the making of all your tomorrows. Your future will be richer or poorer to the extent that you do that work now or leave it undone. Just where I am I must be brave, this is my test, the test God gave. Although I long for higher tasks, right here I must do what life asks. Evelyn Gage Brown. So many of us keep looking back to our lost opportunities, lost fortunes, and think if only I had that chance again, what wonders I could do. Whatever the experience was, good or bad, it taught its lesson. Remember the lesson, and forget the rest. We go, you know, in the direction in which we are headed. Look not behind thee, the Lord bade Lot in the olden days. And you remember what happened to Lot's wife when she failed to heed that command. Many a man today has met the same fate and become no better than a pillar of salt, or, in today's parlance, a dead one, by hugging to himself his losses, bemoaning his altered position, instead of using the experience acquired from these to gain greater position and increased riches. All have a share in the beauty, all have a part in the plan. What does it matter what duty falls to the lot of man? Someone has blended the plaster, and someone has carried the stone. Neither the man nor the master ever has builded alone, making a roof for the weather, building a house for the king. Only by working together men have accomplished a thing. In the paper some time ago appeared an account of the finding of the tomb of King Zoser, a famous pharaoh of the 3rd dynasty, who lived about 4000 BC. King Zoser was the builder of the Great Step Pyramid near Saqqara. The Egyptians of Zoser's day were far more civilized than any of the nations around them. The Greeks, for instance, were still wandering tribes of freebooters and pirates. Rome was not even thought of. But away in Asia was a country as far ahead of Egypt as Egypt was of its savage neighbors. That country was China. 4,000 years before Christ, China was already a highly civilized country. People lived in houses, rode in carriages, dressed in rich silks, wore leather shoes, ate food from plates, measured time by sundials, even carried umbrellas. In those days China was the seat of learning, civilization, and progress. And do you know why? Because China alone among all the earlier nations had developed a religion without fear and without priests, while other countries were still struggling along in deadly fear of fetish or taboo. When other nations were in the thrall of high priests or medicine men, China left everyone to worship in his own way. Every man was free to progress. There were no taboos, no fetishes. There was nothing to hold a man back. So for thousands of years, China went steadily forward, the vanguard of the nations. But then suddenly all progress stopped. For 2,500 years China has stood still while the world has passed her by. Today she stands a tragic figure, one of the most backward of nations, prey of aggressors. Why? Because she looked back. That fearless, forward-looking religion of hers was turned backward, was ritualized. Instead of a religion of freedom of worship, it became one of forms and ceremonies. Instead of merely honoring one's ancestors, ancestor worship became the religion. 2,500 years ago there was born in China a man who so loved the ancient customs that he turned them into a state religion. His name was Kung Fu Tse, or, as we call it, Confucius. Confucius spent all his early life collecting and editing the writings of his people. It was not until he was 51 years old that he was made magistrate of the state of Chengtu. Within a year he had rid the city of crime, not by rigorous penalties, not by a strong police force, but by an elaborate system of etiquette. 300 points of behavior, and 3,000 points of etiquette instead of the means, these became the end of existence. Every action, under whatever circumstance, was worked out in its entirety, and rules laid down governing it. No initiative, no individual thinking was either wanted or tolerated. Men were divided into classes, and became merely animated dummies, to be worked in unison by the authorities above them who pulled the string. No longer was the common man encouraged to better his condition. On the contrary, he was told by China's greatest religious teacher that there was no grosser guilt than to be discontented with his lot. There were but 3 jewels of character, and the choicest of the 3 was inactivity. Next to this was humility, and third, frugality. No longer was the ambitious youth permitted to experiment, to progress. He was assured by China's most orthodox teacher that all change was injurious, that salvation could be attained only by adhering strictly to the religious and social order that was already established. Whatever had been was good. Whatever one's ancestors had done was to be revered. Whatever was new, untried, or experimental, was bad. Imagine the effect of such teachings, inculcated into the young of a nation for more than 2,500 years. A wonderful thing for those already rich, already in authority, but how about the poor workers? How about the millions of hopeless plodders? Is it any wonder China is backward? From the beginning of time, the one unpardonable sin in nature has been to stand still. When a nation or an institution or an individual becomes too complacent, when it feels that it has made all the progress that can be made, it is time to look for the undertaker. Its end is not far off. When a family takes more pride in its ancestors than in what it is doing today, you can write finis across its history. Lot's wife was not the first nor the last of mankind to be lost by looking backward. There is only one road for each of us. That is the road ahead. There is only one way to look. That is in front of you. Forget what is past, except insofar as you can profit by the experience of past mistakes. Live in the present. Remember, each night I burn the records of the day. Tomorrow every soul is born again. Did you ever read Emerson's advice in his letter to his daughter? Finish every day and be done with it. You have done what you could today. Some blunders and absurdities no doubt crept in, but forget them as soon as you can. Tomorrow is a new day. You shall begin it well and serenely, and with too high a spirit to be cumbered with your old nonsense. This day is for all that is good and fair. It is too dear to waste a moment on the forgotten yesterdays. Life is change, progress, no single thing abides, but all things flow. Fragment to fragment clings, the things thus grow until we know and name them. By degrees they melt and are no more the things we know. Nothing abides. Thy seas in a delicate haze go off, those moon sands forsake their place, and where they are shall other seas in turn mow with their sides of whiteness other bays. Lucretius.